Have you ever inherited something from your family and felt deep down that it wasn't just an ordinary object? Something that carries more than memories, something darker, almost alive. Imagine the weight of a legacy not written in stories or photos, but in shadows and whispered secrets you can't quite explain. My name is James, and a few months ago, I moved into a modest apartment in a quiet suburb far from the bustling city life I'd grown tired of. It was a fresh start, a blank slate, after years of aimless work and restless nights. Nothing about that place seemed unusual at first. The neighborhood was peaceful, the streets lined with trees, and my new home was tucked between familiar houses, the kind you see in postcards for perfect family life. The apartment itself was part of an old Victorian-style building, one of those places that had been standing for over a century quietly watching time slip by. It wasn't fancy, but it had character, creaking floors, tall windows, and that faint, musty smell you expect from a house that has held generations before you. It felt strangely comforting to be somewhere with history. Not long after moving in, I received a package from my estranged uncle, someone I barely knew but who had recently passed away. The letter inside was simple, unsigned with just a few lines. This belonged to our family for generations. I think it's time you had it. Wrapped carefully was a small wooden box, old and worn with intricate carvings that felt more like symbols than decorations. I didn't expect much, perhaps some antique jewelry or a trinket of sentimental value. Instead, inside the box lay a faded, cracked mirror, no bigger than a notebook. Its surface was strangely distorted, as if the glass itself breathed and moved with a life of its own. I placed it on my dresser, dismissing the unease that prickled at the back of my mind. Days passed. Life settled into its usual rhythm. Work, meals, quiet evenings. But the mirror was always there, just on the edge of my vision. Sometimes, when I glanced at it from across the room, I thought I saw fleeting shapes, shadows that didn't belong to me. I told myself it was nothing but tricks of tired eyes. Still that night, I dreamed vividly. I was a child again, running through dark woods, where the trees whispered secrets in a language I couldn't understand. The mirror appeared in the dream, glowing faintly, calling me closer. I woke up with a cold sweat, the image so real it lingered in my mind all day. Over time, I noticed subtle changes, not just in the mirror, but in myself. Moments of forgetfulness, sudden bursts of anger over trivial things, or a creeping sadness I couldn't explain. It was as if the heirloom was reaching inside me, stirring something dormant. My friends joked that I was losing it, but I knew something was different. The strangest part was the feeling of being watched. Not by a person, but by something unseen, like a presence that lingered just beyond the edges of reality. I found myself talking to the mirror in quiet moments, almost out of habit, trying to understand what it wanted. And sometimes I thought I heard whispers so faint I could barely catch the words. The apartment itself started to feel alive. Doors creaked open by themselves. Cold drafts swept through rooms with no windows open. On more than one occasion, I found objects I never placed where I'd left them, small things like a book, a pen, or a key. Nothing valuable, but enough to unsettle me. One evening, while staring into the mirror, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint silhouette behind my reflection. I blinked and it was gone, but the seed of fear had taken root. What had I inherited? Was it just a relic from the past? Or was it something more sinister, something that had carried the souls of those who came before me? Could an object really hold a presence, a consciousness that could influence the living? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that my life was no longer my own. The mirror was waiting, watching slowly, weaving its dark thread into my days and nights. And this was just the beginning. At first, I tried to ignore the odd occurrences. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the house's age was playing tricks on me. Old buildings make noises, groans, creaks, drafts that feel like cold fingers brushing your skin. But there was something about this mirror, this heirloom, that didn't fit into any reasonable explanation. It started with small things. One night I heard a soft knock on the apartment door at exactly 3 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I peeked through the peephole, no one was there. The hallway was empty and silent, lit only by the dim emergency lights that flickered faintly. I shrugged it off, blaming a prankster or maybe an animal outside. But the knocks didn't stop. For 3 nights in a row, the same pattern: knock, pause, knock always at 3 a.m. On the 4th night, I didn't even bother to check. I lay still, pretending not to hear, but the unease settled in deep like a cold stone pressing against my chest. Then came the strange dreams again, more vivid and disturbing. This time the mirror showed up in a different way, not just glowing faintly, but as a portal. I saw faces trapped inside it, flickering like fading photographs. Their eyes seemed to plead silently, mouths moving but no sound escaping. I woke up, gasping, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that those souls were trapped, begging for release, or perhaps revenge. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found an old leather-bound journal tucked behind a loose floorboard in the bedroom. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. Flipping through it, I discovered it belonged to the previous owner of the apartment, a man named Elias, who had lived there almost a century ago. The journal was full of ramblings about curses, spirits, and the power of objects to trap souls. The more I read, the more it felt like a confession of madness. But the last entry chilled me to the bone, a description of a mirror with the exact carvings as mine. Elias wrote about how the mirror was never just glass, it was a prison, and those trapped within it could reach out to the living, twisting their minds. And then my name appeared at the bottom of the page. Just my name, written in shaky ink, as if the writer was warning me or perhaps cursing me. I tried to tell a friend, but it sounded ridiculous. How could an object influence someone? How could souls be trapped inside glass? But I wasn't alone in this. The mirror's influence grew stronger. Objects in my apartment started moving on their own. Sometimes a chair slightly shifted. Sometimes my keys disappeared, only to reappear in odd places like the freezer or inside a shoe. One night, while brushing my teeth, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a figure behind metal, shadowy with no distinct face. When I spun around, the room was empty. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. But a growing dread gnawed at me, a feeling that the mirror wasn't just a passive object, but an active force in my life. And then my behavior began to change. I started waking up earlier than usual, unable to stay in bed despite exhaustion. My mood swung unpredictably. Irritability replaced my usual calm demeanor. I found myself staring at the mirror for long stretches, almost entranced. Sometimes I muttered things under my breath, words I didn't remember saying later. It was as if the mirror was breaking down my walls, pulling something out from deep within. One evening, after an especially difficult day, I sat in front of it feeling completely drained. As I looked into the glass, my reflection seemed off. There was a darkness in my eyes, a hollow look that wasn't mine. Suddenly, a whisper floated from the mirror's surface just beyond hearing. Remember. The word hung in the air, chilling and demanding. I recoiled, the cold sweat covering my skin. What was I supposed to remember? What connection did I have to this haunted object? And why did it feel like the mirror was slowly taking over my mind? Every night I grew more isolated, less able to explain the creeping fear that had settled in. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. The mirror was no longer just an heirloom. It was a gate I was trapped behind. Days turned into restless nights, and the mirror's grip tightened. I began noticing patterns, eerie rules that seemed to govern the strange happenings. The mirror wasn't random, it followed its own cryptic logic. Like a game with invisible rules I was forced to play. One rule became clear fast. Never look into the mirror after 2 a.m. I learned this the hard way. It was a late night when I caught myself glancing at it just past that hour. The reflection wasn't my own anymore. Instead, I saw something or someone lurking behind me, a figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile that froze my blood. I spun around, but the room was empty. From that night on, I refused to face the mirror after dark. But it didn't stop influencing me. Objects moved more violently now. I'd wake up to find furniture rearranged or the box that held the mirror open, as if unseen hands had been rifling through it. My behavior became more erratic. Friends started to notice. I snapped at simple questions, withdrew from conversations, and spent hours staring into nothing. At work, I'd catch myself zoning out, haunted by whispered voices only I could hear. One afternoon, digging deeper into the apartment's history, I discovered a shocking truth decades ago. The building was home to a family tragedy. An infant reportedly kept isolated in a hidden room for years before dying under mysterious circumstances. Rumors swirled of a curse placed on the house tied to the objects the family left behind. Could the mirror be connected? Was it a vessel carrying the soul of that lost child? Something far darker. The idea terrified me, yet a twisted part of me was drawn to it. I found myself talking to the mirror, more desperate for answers, and sometimes it answered back. It started with subtle shifts words, appearing faintly on the glass surface when I wasn't looking directly. Messages like "free me" or "don't trust." One night I woke to see a phrase carved into the wooden frame: "Lies bind us." I realized then that honesty was another rule. Every time I lied, no matter how small, the mirror's presence grew. Stronger whispers turning into screams, shadows stretching longer. One evening, I tried breaking the cycle. I confessed everything aloud, hoping that truth would weaken the mirror's hold. But instead, the reflection fractured. Cracks spider-webbed across the glass, and the air filled with a chilling cold that seeped into my bones. A voice deep, echoing not my own, spoke. From the mirror's depths, "You are ours now." Panic surged, but I was powerless. The mirror wasn't just a window. It was a prison and a trap, and I had stepped inside. The boundaries between myself and the souls trapped within blurred. I felt their pain, their anger, their hunger for release. At times I woke with scratches on my arms, marks I didn't remember making. Sleep became a battleground. Dreams twisted into nightmares where I was lost in a labyrinth of mirrors, each one reflecting a different tortured soul, all reaching out, all wanting freedom. The mirror had rules, yes, but breaking them only tightened the chains. I understood now. This object wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It fed on fear, on lies, on the weakness of those who dared to claim it. And the more I resisted, the deeper it burrowed into my mind. I thought if I could break free, destroy the mirror, maybe I could reclaim my life. One night, trembling but determined, I grabbed a hammer. The cold metal felt heavy in my hands as I raised it above the glass, ready to shatter the cursed heirloom once and for all. But before the hammer could fall, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and the reflection smiled no grinder, cruel knowing smile that wasn't mine. The room darkened and a whisper filled the air, cold and deadly. You belong to us now. I froze, unable to look away, as the reflection changed. Instead of myself, I saw the faces of the trapped souls, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Then, something impossible happened. The mirror cracked, but instead of breaking apart, the fractures spread like veins of shadow crawling toward me. I dropped the hammer and stumbled back, heart hammering. When I looked down, I realized the wooden box that held the mirror was no longer on the dresser. It was beside my bed, glowing faintly in the dark. And on my nightstand lay a small ancient dolon, I'd never seen before. Its glass eyes seemed alive, following me with an eerie intensity. That night, sleep escaped me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the doll move closer. I dared not turn to look. At dawn, exhausted and terrified, I dared to glance at the doll. It wasn't where I left it. Instead, it sat on my pillow, staring directly at me with a sinister grin. I felt the presence of the mirror's souls around me watching, waiting. I tried to leave the apartment, but the door wouldn't budge, as if invisible hands held it shut. My phone had no signal, and the windows showed only darkness beyond. Trapped, I realized the truth. The mirror wasn't just an object, nor was it just haunted. It was a doorway, a prison for souls, and now for me. In my last desperate act, I whispered a plea to whatever powers might hear, "Release me." Silence answered, but then a voice low and cold echoed from the mirror's depths. "You cannot escape when you carry us within." The doll's grin widened, and the room grew icy. I turned slowly, knowing the boundary between worlds was breaking. And as I looked back at the mirror, I saw not one reflection, but many faces staring, waiting, trapped forever in glass. Maybe this story ends here, or maybe it's only the beginning. Because some heirlooms don't just carry memories, they carry souls, and some souls never rest.